Hello my friends, Stark here. Stark date 2023.12.27. This video concerns the fitment of a new rear bumper to my 1997 Chevrolet Suburban. Fitment of this bumper was a torturous process, and I respectfully request that you suffer with me by watching this video. This is my 1997 Chevrolet Suburban. It's my only SUV, and I love it. A few years ago, I towed a motorhome with my Chevrolet Suburban via a tow strap. I hooked the tow strap to the tow hitch assembly and not to the rear bumper, and yet somehow the tow strap caught under the bumper and ripped the steel. Subsequently, I was unhappy with the rear appearance of the Chevrolet Suburban, given that the rear bumper was twisted and torn. Finally, it's time to replace that damaged rear bumper with a new one. I have decided to coat the inner surface of the bumper before it is fitted to the vehicle. If I don't complete this task now, then it will never be completed, because once fitted to the vehicle, it will be so much harder to coat and protect that inner surface. Now, the inner surface is chrome plated, but unlike the outer surface, which is the beauty surface, the inner surface is not polished. I realize that there are several choices of coatings that could be applied. Some people might use Miracle Paint or POR 15, paint over rust in 15 minutes. I've decided, however, to use etch primer followed by silver Rust-Oleum. This is a repair to a 1997 Chevrolet Suburban. It's not a Shelby Mustang. I've removed the large strengthening bracket and the pair of attachment brackets, just so as I can coat where those brackets would otherwise obscure laying of the paint. And I'd like to point out a couple of rusty areas, rust from the factory. This is how the bumper came. And one could argue that I should abrade those two rusty areas, but I'm not a body guy, and I fear that I would do more harm than good, because I would be stripping away the chrome plating in those two areas as well as the rust. And instead, I will attempt to seal the rust in place with several layers of etch primer and silver Rust-Oleum. In theory, if I can prevent both air and moisture from reaching the steel, then I will inhibit further rusting. Alright, I've applied the first coat of etch primer. Goes on green, as you can see. Keep in mind that this is the inner surface of the rear bumper, and thus it will never be seen. so it doesn't matter whether there are paint runs. Better too thick than too thin. This is the product that I use, Rust-Oleum Self-Etching Primer. I highly recommend it. This is a great product. And Rust-Oleum, if your representatives are watching this video, please consider sponsoring it. I moved the bumper outside for a little more light, and I have sprayed the second and third coats of etch primer. But the day is getting on and my shadow is getting long, and so we will wait for tomorrow for the top coat. I have applied 3 coats of Rust-Oleum chrome paint. By the way, I should tell you that paint and I have never mixed well. Truth is, I suck at painting, which is why I do mechanical repairs and not bodywork. I de-rusted the tow hitch assembly and coated it with a rust encapsulator named Miracle Paint. Check the rugged construction of this tow hitch assembly. Wow, super beefy. I have reassembled the rear bumper, and beforehand I applied an extra coat of black paint to that central bracketry. I also applied aluminum-based anti-seize to the threaded studs. I have anti-seize on every bolt, and I will apply anti-seize to the bolts that secure the bumper to the SUV. Have you ever visited friends, family, or some other location, departed from that location, and then returned a short while later, and inevitably someone asked you, typically with a smile upon his or her face, "What did you forget?" Well, my response has always been to tell that person, "No, it's what I remembered. Had I truly forgotten, then I wouldn't have returned. I wouldn't be back here again now, would I?" In the same way, I remembered, not forgot, the 2 lower bumper bolts. These are chrome-plated mushroom head bolts that enter through the lower surface of the bumper and are secured by a nut on the other side of that strengthening bracketry, that brace that I have previously mentioned. And here's the other side. Yeah, positive outlook. I remembered, not forgot. Well, it probably doesn't look much different, does it? Yet, I did just spray a lick of gloss black Rust-Oleum over the tow hitch assembly and corner bracketry. Well, I think I'm ready to mount the rear bumper. This is the scary part, huh? I have a fitment problem. The distance from the outer surface of one frame extension to the outer surface of the other is 3 feet and a 3/4 inch, whereas the distance from the inner surface of one side of the bumper bracket to the inner surface of the other side is 3.5 feet. That's only a 1/4 inch difference, but it's enough that the bumper bracket will not fit over the frame extensions. I don't know. Is it because this particular SUV is fitted with a tow hitch assembly? Is that why it won't fit? I've tried to force the bumper bracket over the tow hitch assembly. It's too tight a fit. It won't go into place. At this point, with nothing to lose, I propose to cut the bumper bracket here and the same place on the other side. I will lose the center section, but I will have effectively 2 large angle brackets with which to attach the rear bumper. I realize that without the center section, that will weaken the rear bumper, but at some point in the future, I could weld across from one side of the angle bracket to the other, and that would return strength to the rear bumper assembly. I used my bandsaw to cut the bumper bracket, so now I have 3 pieces of metal instead of 1, and hopefully I haven't ruined it. We'll see. Smooth the sharp edges. Just a little bit more. That should do it. This is my new rear bumper setup without the center section. Hope it works. Oh boy, this task seems to have morphed into one of those jobs that drags on and on because of unforeseen problems. So even after sawing the bumper bracket into 3 pieces and discarding the center section, that still didn't give enough clearance to mount the bumper to the tow hitch assembly. Thus, my next step was to have these two holes and the two in the bracket on the other side milled to expand the original circular holes into a lozenge shape. Thus, when I fit the bracket over the studs in the bumper, I'll now be able to shift this bracket assembly this way. And let's go to the other side, a mirror image. And once again, when this bracket is fitted over the two studs on the other side, I can now shift the bracket that way. And between those two brackets, I should now have the additional 1/4 inch clearance such that I can fit the bumper assembly over the tow hitch assembly. If you recall, that, I think, is the origin of the problem. I think that the tow hitch assembly is just a little wider than the factory frame extensions, and thus the brand new bumper and kit doesn't fit without modification. I don't have a machine shop, far from it. I have some nice heavy duty tables, a decent Ellis drill press, heavy duty grinding machine, a band saw, parts washer, and another vise, and a drill press clamp. Well, that's about it. And I don't have a lathe, and I don't have a mill or milling machine. I don't own a mill, and thus I asked one of my friends, who does own a mill, if he would machine those two brackets such to mill the original circular holes into the lozenge shapes that we just looked at. Forgive me if I tell you things that you already know or you think are obvious. Just keep in mind that not everyone knows, and it isn't obvious to everyone. The main difference between a drill press and a mill is the number of axes of movement. So here upon my drill press, there is only one axis of movement. We'll call that the Y-axis because it's vertical. We can move the drill head down to the work and let it back up again. But that's the one and only axis of movement. Whereas a mill has two further axes. The work surface or deck can be moved backwards and forwards. We'll call that the Z-axis, as well as left and right. We'll call that the X-axis. Here's a drill bit. You know it's a drill bit because it has a pointed end, whereas milling bits are typically flat-topped. So if we can pretend that this is a milling bit, then we can imagine it abrading or eating into the project horizontally. Imagine that that bit is moving across this way. That's what a milling machine allows the user to do, whereas a drill press can only drill vertically downward. In summary, you can use a mill to drill, but you can't use a drill press to mill. The saga of the Suburban rear bumper continues because I encountered another problem. But of course, what else did you expect? The 4 main bolts that secured the rear bumper to the tow hitch assembly terminated at captive nuts, which were encircled by sheet steel cages. The cages were tack welded to the tow hitch assembly. Typically, captive nuts are square instead of hexagonal because, size for size, a square has longer sides than a hexagon, thus decreasing the likelihood that the captive nut can spin within the cage. Time and rust had weakened the sheet steel cages, and thus when I attempted to tighten the first of the 4 bolts, the torque of the captive nut deformed and twisted the steel cage, thus permitting the captive nut to spin within the cage. I was unable to tighten that first bolt. I didn't try it on the other 3 cages, and instead opted to remove all 4 cages using a reciprocal saw, grind off the tack welds, and repaint the bare metal. From now on, the bumper will be secured by regular nuts instead of captive nuts. Well, here it is. Mission accomplished. Yeah, it's a little anticlimactic, isn't it? It's just a bumper on a Chevrolet Suburban. I can't believe how much trouble it gave. I fitted engines into vehicles that gave less trouble than this rear bumper. Here's a view from under the vehicle. We're looking at the back side of the rear bumper. I've used copious quantities of anti-seize. There's the bracket on the left side of the bumper, and the bracket on the right side of the bumper. So the center section is missing, and perhaps I should reconnect these 2 brackets either by welding or by nuts and bolts in order to strengthen the bumper assembly, but it's unnecessary from an aesthetic or beauty point of view. And I certainly won't be towing anything with this bumper. No need for that, because here is the massive tow hitch assembly, which was the cause of all of the fitment problems related to this bumper. Thank you so much, my friends. Truly, I hope that it was as tedious for you to watch as it was for me to install.